Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when and where you are watching this. And welcome to another Festival in a Box 3.0 tasting session. And today we are looking at the Bimber Apogee XII. And I'm delighted to say we're joined by Matt McKay from Bimber Distillery itself. And he's going to join us just now, so I'm going to bring him in. Good morning, Matt. How are you doing?
Hey, Eddie, good to see you. How are you?
I'm pretty good actually, pretty good. I think I've got pretty much all my shopping done and all that kind of thing. So hoping for
you're all set.
Stress-free few days leading up to. But anyway, listen, thanks so much for coming on and giving us a bit of your time today just to talk about the Apogee 12.
Sure, no problem.
I'm pronouncing it correctly.
You are.
Just before we get started with the tasting, Matt, if you wouldn't mind just giving everyone a bit of an idea of who it is you are and what you do with Bimber.
Sure. So I'm Matt McKay and I head up marketing and communications for Bimber Distillery. I've been with the distillery roughly 6 months before we launched our first ever release, aptly called The First. That's a little while ago now. That's just over 2 years ago. And in that time, whilst I was brought into the distillery to help launch that first product, I've ended up becoming a little bit of a part of the furniture. So my role has expanded quite a lot. So whilst I do all the sort of external communications and a lot of the presentations like we're talking you here today, I'm also responsible for cask assessment, cask selection, and then working with the wider team around product development, such as the Apogee 12 that we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, a broad range of things that I like to get stuck into with Bimber.
Fantastic. So basically you do pretty much a bit of everything.
We are a small distillery, and so everybody has to do a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Yes. I must admit, I love that about the newer, smaller distilleries. It's very tight teams where everyone gets mucked in, and probably like it used to be in the good old days, as they call it.
Yeah, and it's a bit hectic and, to be honest, a little bit unstructured at times, but it's an amazingly fun place to work, and you do get, as a natural whiskey fan, you do get exposure to lots of different things in the whiskey industry, in the production side of things, in the creative processes. Whereas I suspect in a large distillery, you're going to have that support network, but you're going to be a little bit more pigeonholed. So personally, I wouldn't have it any other way. You learn a great deal by getting stuck in and giving things a go.
Yeah. No doubt about that. Anyway, we're going to be tasting the Apogee 12, as you said. I've got a bottle here standing by, so I know the folks at home probably be quite keen to get stuck in. So I'm going to pour myself a wee dram of that for now, and then perhaps while we're assessing the whiskey, you can give us a little bit of background on it, because obviously it's a bit of a departure from what you normally do at Bimber.
Yeah, it's totally a departure, Eddie. Apogee has been in development for 2 years. Almost immediately after I joined Bimber, we were talking around how effectively we can do two things. Number one, we can show off our blending prowess as producers, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But number two, and this became much more obvious as the sort of first 6 months to year of actually bottling our London single malt happened, how we can actually have a product that's available. It's a good problem to have, but those of you who do know Bimber will know that quite often you'll visit our website and you'll look at what's on the shop, and the answer is nothing. It's a good problem to have, but a lot of our whiskeys sell out within seconds. And whilst that's pleasing, it's not pleasing. We want people to come and be able to experience something with us and see what we've made. But there's no physical way that we can speed up our whiskey making process. We're not prepared to cut down those long handcrafted processes that we use to make our London single malt. And equally, we can't just, as a small business, stick in 28 pairs of stills and suddenly make more of it. And even if we did, there'd still be that delay of years whilst we wait for the spirit. And so Apogee was very much crafted as a response to that, to have a product that we fundamentally believe in, that it shows off our craft, but at the same time, it does provide the business with a product that we can make continually and have available. The name, it comes from two things. The word means the highest point of a satellite, so a zenith, a pinnacle, and we like to sort of use that in terms of being the zenith, the highest point of our blending, to show how we've elevated some liquid. And I'll talk about what that liquid is in a minute. The name also comes from one of my favorite 90s computer game companies, Apogee Software, who made the likes of Duke Nukem. So a little bit of a fond memory in terms of naming it. The actual whiskey, what we've done here is we have sourced whiskies from Scotland. We've sourced those whiskies based around their profile, not their name. It's why the whiskies on there are not named, deliberately so. We've selected them because of the characters that they bring. We brought those back to the distillery, thus moving them outside Scotland. They are no longer Scotch. That's fine for us. Neither is Bimber. We blended them together, and that took quite a long time to get the proportions right so that we felt that that base liquid was exactly where we wanted it. And then after that, we have additionally matured, finished as it were, that base liquid in ex-bourbon, ex-Bimber casks. So casks that have been used to create expressions such as Bimber ex-bourbon casks, batch 1 and 2. 25,000 bottles were created. That's just the first batch. The idea, as I said, is to have this product continually available. So if you want to try it, you can try it, rather than it being something like a Bimber London single malt that within, you know, a few minutes or a few hours, it's all gone, never to be seen again. But it very much was a product of the whole team. So I was responsible for the naming and the sort of concept around how we're talking about this whiskey. Ewelina, our founder, is responsible for the design. The bottle itself is a piece of custom glass. It's been designed to reflect the beveled surfaces of Bimber's pot stills. You can just about see that on the picture with the slight sort of beveling around the label. And then, of course, Darius, our founder and master distiller, has been responsible for pulling together the liquid. So it very much is, and I like it, a product of the whole team, because as we alluded to when I first came on, we've all got to get stuck in and hands-on. And here is a product that its very design, conception, and end result is about the whole team getting stuck in. But it isn't Bimber, and we are 100% transparent about that. It's not designed to be Bimber. It's designed for a different audience. But what I do believe we've achieved is that additional maturation in our casks, which for this first batch was around 6 months, it has brought with it some of that texture, some of that spice that you do get on the Bimber whiskies. So yeah, I believe that we've enhanced that base liquid that we played with to give it an additional sense of character, and that character derives from Bimber's character.
Fascinating. Are you able to tell us, Matt, how many roughly different single malts have gone into here, or from how many different distilleries makes it represents?
Ooh, what am I going to say to that, Eddie?
Well, I tell you what, is it more or less than half a dozen?
Less.
Right. Okay, that'll do.
Yeah, I was going to say more than 2. So if you take my more than 2 and you're less than half a dozen, you're going to be in the right ballpark there.
Great.
Yeah.
And the casks themselves, are they mainly ex-bourbon casks?
Yeah.
Single malt?
No, they're all ex-bourbon casks, and the finishing period in our cask is ex-bourbon as well. So it's sort of straight down the line. That's not to say that we might well in the future see different Apogee SKUs, you know, Apogee using those same sort of base flavors, but with some different casks going into the mix. That is absolutely open for discussion. We've been really pleased with the reception to Apogee, so I could certainly see and hope that the range will expand over time. But yeah, this first one, this sort of, I'm going to call it a core because it's available constantly. This first core release, 100% ex-bourbon casks, both in its original creation and in the finishing.
And in terms of flavors, what should we expect in the glass from Apogee?
Sure. I hate giving tasting notes. I have a website where I do that myself. I'll be very broad. On the nose and on the arrival, you're looking for bright fruitiness. So delicate fruits, accessibility, anything from orchard fruits through to stone fruits with maybe just a hint of tropicalness. Not too much. It's only 12 years old. And those tropical notes tend to develop a little bit later in the life of whiskey. But yeah, that opening, you're looking for fruitiness. But then on the palate, what you're going to find, and as I alluded to just previously, is a little bit more texture, a little bit of sort of oily butteriness, and that little bit of back palate spice. And that wasn't from the original casks. They were very much just that sort of fruity, easygoingness. That spice has come from effectively being re-racked into some of our Bimber casks, which are still pretty active. So yeah, your overall experience is of a light, easygoing, versatile whiskey that's still got a little bit of a pep to it. You know, it's not just all plain sailing. There's a little bit more under the hood. And
in terms of the finishing in those Bimber casks, what, roughly speaking, what would that period look like?
Sure. So I don't want to be drawn on what it's always going to look like.
No.
Because everything we do at Bimber, and this is even down to distillation, people say, well, how long are your cut points? And I say, well, they're not. You know, they are. They're not cut at any particular ABV. There is a range, obviously. They're not cut at any particular time. It's all done by the human senses. And we're going to treat Apogee in the same way. So what I will say is this first batch, it has been a 6-month finish. Equally, when we do a second batch, it could be 7, it could be 5. It's literally going to be when we are happy with that end result. So yeah, 6 months for this first one, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be the same. It's about the integrity and the quality of the product rather than it always being a same, linear amount of time.
Yeah. No. Oh no, I totally appreciate that each batch will be different. And as you say, you're very hands-on throughout every single process, including obviously the final product and tasting it and working out when it's ready. So you know, I definitely wouldn't hold you to that 6 months every time, because whiskey is quite an organic thing, isn't it? And it does
absolutely
behave unexpectedly on occasion. So it's important to constantly taste it and assess it, which is such a pain, I'm sure.
It's horrible when you're just sitting there in the distillery on a Friday. What have you got to do today? I've just got to taste all these things and decide what we're doing with it.
My heart literally bleeds for you.
I know.
Now listen, not everybody watching will have come across Bimber before, and you might think, well, who are these Bimber people? So it'd be great if you could maybe give us a little bit of background. I mean, I know that you haven't been around, for a long time, although you're not certainly the newest distillery on the block by any stretch of the imagination. But you definitely have an interesting backstory as far as the distillery goes, and it'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, we're not the new guys anymore. We were founded in 2016, so we've now got 5-year-old whiskey, which it isn't old, but there are newer distilleries compared to us. Not my background, but our founder's background is from Poland. Darius, our master distiller, his father and grandfather before him were moonshiners. It's where the name Bimber comes from. Bimber in Polish means moonshine. And so he, from a very young age, learnt the art of distillation. But he learned that art in the most hands-on way. So when you're moonshining, you're not plugged into a computer. You don't have temperature control. You don't have these steam coils that are sitting there always constantly doing the exact same thing. You're doing it illicitly. You're doing it with really basic equipment, and you're distilling using your human senses. So smell, touch, and taste. And that's very much the fundamentals that we've brought over to Bimber. There's one computer in the distillery. It's not on the distillery floor. It's in the office. So everything is done. And it's such an overused phrase, by hand, handcrafted, hand selected. But we say that because we fundamentally, are doing that. There is no automation there. We are distilling using the human senses in a way that Darius and his forebears learned in Poland during the communist era. So as I said earlier, the cut points are not done by time. They're not done by ABV. They're done by taste. We are based in North Acton. so not too far from Diageo and the Whiskey Exchange on an industrial estate. It's not the most gloriously pretty part of town. We don't have a distillery waterfall behind us like some of our well-esteemed Scottish colleagues. But what we do have is a distillery that, other than growing the barley, everything is under one roof. So the barley comes in from one field, Fordham and Allen, based down in Basingstoke. It comes in once a week. We're so small we don't have grain storage, so it requires weekly deliveries. We then process all of that through the whiskey production plant. The highlights in terms of differences being we don't mill the barley, we just simply crack it, which results in a very clear wort. We ferment for 7 days, which for some spirits is not that long, but for whiskey is pretty long indeed. And we ferment in open-top washbacks. So what that means is, whilst the active yeast dies down after 4 days, because we have those washbacks, those fermenters open, we get a secondary malolactic fermentation from wild yeast, which really adds to the sort of fruity flavors. So our wash after 7 days is actually, it's fruity, but it's actually sort of starting to sour. And so it's sort of it's a little bit less approachable than the wash you might have been able to enjoy at other distilleries. But our fundamental belief is that distillation is a reinforcement of the flavors that you create during fermentation. So by pushing that wash through 2 fermentations, one on the yeast, one through wild yeast, we develop an immense amount of esters, which then, using direct fire, we burn into the spirit, the heavier compounds, similar to a steak. When you could sous vide a steak and it's all juicy and delicious, but it's a little bit anemic. But when you char a steak, the charring doesn't just actually give you a visual note, it actually adds flavor, it adds some sort of sweetness and texture. We do exactly the same with our stills. Direct fire, burning the heavier compounds into the spirit, whilst the lighter elements, those sort of fruity compounds that we've developed in fermentation, going quicker up the line arm. Bottling, labeling, packaging, dispatching, all under one roof. Yeah, it's a great distillery to visit because it's small, and sometimes you can go to a distillery and even if you understand barley, water, yeast, you're saying, right, the pipe goes up here and down, it gets quite complicated. What's happening here? Why is this pipe going there? In Bimber, you can stand in the middle of a distillery, rotate 360 degrees, and you've seen every part of the whiskey making process other than growing the barley. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I was about to say that it really needs to be seen to be believed, because it's such a tremendous experience to come and see the distillery. And like you say, you can literally just turn around 360 degrees and you've seen the whole process going on. And it's very unlike any distillery tour that folks might have been on in Scotland or even elsewhere. So yeah, so definitely when the situation allows, would be recommending that people come and see you and experience for themselves. In terms of future developments, Matt, I know that you have a new distillery in the works, which is not actually in London or even England. So maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit more about that, but also any further developments at Bimber, any bottlings we should be looking out for. I know the Bimber Club is probably the best way to find out about those, because obviously they get advance notice of new bottlings and exclusive bottlings as well.
Yeah, so I'll deal with the Bimber side and then I'll move outside of England. So yeah, as you say, Eddie, Bimber Club is a great way of A, keeping up to date with what we're doing, and B, getting hold of exclusive releases purely for members of Bimber Club. We've just released our second Bimber Club release, Vino de Naranja cask, orange wine cask. Seems to have gone down quite well. But yeah, the club is £40 lifetime fee. So lots of benefits there and a great way to maintain a grip of what we're doing and when it's coming out. I would say there are 2 things on the horizon for Bimber. There are lots more, but I'm going to focus on 2. First of all, next year, our peated whiskey will come of age. We released a peated whiskey, but the barley wasn't actually peated. We'd used casks that had previously held ex-Islay whiskey to get that peat into the spirit. Next year, we'll be releasing whiskey using barley that we've actually peated ourselves. We did that in Darius's basement, and then we built a smoker. It looks like a giant beehive. It's quite a crazy thing. And then for the last 2 years, we've been doing small peat runs ourselves. And the first of those will come of age next year. So super excited to release something brand new. It is pretty peaty. It's peated to sort of 40, 42 ppm, so it's not messing around, and that will be coming next year. The second thing has been ongoing for a while, and that's the expansion of Bimber. Pre-pandemic, we were all systems go for moving the distillery, still keeping it in London. Bimber will always be a London distillery, but to move to a site, hopefully close to where we are now, where we could expand. We only produce 50,000 litres of pure alcohol a year. That's roughly a barrel a day. We would like to double that to 100,000 litres of alcohol. That is still tiny when you compare it to a lot of the distilleries in Scotland who are talking about 4, 5, 8, 11 million litres a year. But for us, doubling the amount that we make would be a real boon, because we just, as I said earlier, we just can't make enough for everybody. However, the pandemic has put a bit of a kibosh on doing that. Everything's been really difficult. And we've been equally as busy with a new project, which is Dunfale Distillery. The Bimber move is still on the cards, but probably not till next year, I would say. Hopefully, we do need to do it. But Dunfale is a go. So we put in planning permission last year for a new distillery in Scotland, based 15 minutes south of Forres. That was signed off, and we were very delighted to announce literally at the beginning of this month that we have received the funding, and building of that distillery had commenced. And we put up the website and opened up founders packages and initial cask sales for those who want to follow the journey from the beginning. The distillery is related to Bimber in the sense that it's almost like a movie brought to you by the people who brought you this movie, but it isn't Bimber 2. It's not Bimber in Scotland. It is its own separate thing. And there's only a few of us at Bimber who are going to be working at Dunfale as well. Obviously, once the distillery is built and we've got people working on casks and people working the stills, they're going to need to be based in Scotland. They can't keep moving from London to Scotland every day. It's not practical. But we have brought some of the learnings from Bimber to that distillery. We're looking at long ferments. We're also going to be using direct fire. The fundamental difference with Dunfale Distillery, though, will be we are constructing a 2-story malting facility, and we're going to be floor malting the barley ourselves. We don't do that at Bimber. There's no space, but in Dunfale, we're going to be building that. Not many distilleries still use floor malting to their full capacity. You'll still see a few that do a bit. Highland Park, Lefroy, you'll see one that does a lot, Springbank. Dunfale will be doing most of it ourselves on these floors. We're also building, people would call it a pagoda. Other people would know it as a Doig ventilating cupola, the little sort of triangular thing that sits on top of the kiln. We're constructing one of those. Ours won't be for show. We will actually be using it to ventilate and dry the barley. Dunfale will be split between unpeated and also peated whiskey. And the combination of that with the floor maltings and the Doig Pagoda, we're effectively trying to make whiskey the way it used to be made 100 years ago, using those processes. So not even air drying. We're going to be using fuel to dry the barley out. We're going to be peating it exactly the same that it was done before, using that kiln. And yeah, we're trying to make something new there. So building off the learnings from Bimber, but equally creating a whiskey, the likes of which I don't think Speyside currently possesses. There is absolutely no point in going up to Speyside, a region steeped with history and amazing distilleries, and just building something that's identical but smaller. That's a pointless endeavor. So we are not trying to do that. We're building something that is smaller, certainly 200,000 litres of alcohol. So in Bimber terms, 4 barrels a day. So still pretty tiny, but with a very clear laser focus on this floor malting side, on manipulating the barley, using the kiln to create whiskey of a style that, yeah, I don't think it's really done too much. And the only reason we can do that is because we're small. The sort of techniques that we're looking at for Dunfale, and certainly the techniques that we use at Bimber, they're frankly not scalable to a distillery that's 5 million litres. It's not going to work. So we're in a fortunate position of being a craft distillery whereby we can play around with those variables. So it's a super exciting time. The distillery we've already started. Darius, when he's not being master distiller of Bimber, he's an architect and runs a construction firm. Great. So we're already up there. We're already starting to prepare the ground. And it's our hope, plans being plans, but it is our hope that this time next year, we will have a distillery that is open and commissioned and spirit running.
Fantastic. And it's a very good news story in these times of kind of threadbare news stories, isn't it, in terms of good news? So it's wonderful to hear, particularly about how traditional it's going to be. And yeah, I can't wait to go and visit it once it's
always welcome. And yeah, once we're up and running, there will be a full visitor centre. We've got a bit more space than in London. So yeah, everyone is very welcome to come and visit and see what we're building up in Scotland.
Tremendous. Well, congratulations to you guys. Now, just taking your Bimber and Dunfail hat off for the second, if you wouldn't mind, Matt. Are there any whiskies that you've tried over the last 12 months or particular distilleries makes that you've tried that have particularly impressed you outside of the Bimber sphere?
So many. This question is always really hard, and I always end up giving the same answer to it. So I'll probably give you the same answer and then try and think in my head and broaden it out quickly. So when I'm not doing whiskey industry things and I'm just drinking whiskey, my preference for whiskey, I like all of it virtually, but if I had to, desert island it, I would say it would be refill ex-bourbon, and it would be something heavily peated. Specifically something from Tobermory Lechick. Everyone who knows me knows that that's my jam. But equally, there's lots of other options out there for that sort of style. Ardmore is still an underappreciated distillery. It's even underappreciated by its owners who don't seem to do it justice. But the indie bottlings of Ardmore, I think, are fantastic. Yeah, there's been a lot of things that have impressed me this year. Talking of English colleagues, the Lakes, I think they've completely changed what they're doing. And I think that the sort of new regime and Davil's route forward, I think they're making amazing whiskey. The other one to absolutely watch is going to be White Peak. A few of you might have tried either their new make spirit or their not whiskey spirit, in barrel, a year, 18 months. And it's great. So it's a really exciting time, both north of the border and also in England. It's a wonderful time to be into whiskey. And there's just so much stuff that, even if you are in the industry trying it all the time, you can't try anywhere near all of it. So it's a wonderful world to explore.
Yes. Well, amen to that. And yeah, it's just a great time to be a whiskey drinker. And I think guys like yourselves and the Lakes and all the kind of more niche craft producers are hopefully giving the big boys, a little bit of a, look round the shoulder, or look what they're doing. Maybe we should think about stuff like that. Not that they don't produce good stuff, but I think it doesn't hurt to push them.
Yeah, I don't think we're threatening them in terms of production volumes by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I think that if you look at English whiskey as a whole, it has two things. One, it has great momentum around innovation. And number two, it has currently independence. And those two things combined have really seen English whiskey in a similar way that a few years ago, Irish whiskey has come along from being, 2 distilleries to 4. And now I think there's nearly 40 now. There is real momentum there. And so yeah, I wouldn't ever dare turn around and say that, the Scots should be in any way fearful of what we're doing. If anything, we're all just part of a wonderful world family whereby, we're introducing more and more people to whiskey. And whiskey is broader than any one distillery or any one country. And that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Finally, Matt, before you go, I wanted to ask you, outside of whiskey, because I can tell it runs through your veins, as it does for many of the presenters, what else tickles your fancy in terms of tipples? Is there anything that you thoroughly go to outside of whiskey?
Sure. So I'll bookend that by saying it's impossible to explore everything, and it's even more impossible to be knowledgeable about everything. And if you try and do that, I think the best that's going to happen is you're going to end up seeing a doctor. So, you have to draw a line somewhere, and whiskey, as you've rightly pointed out, it runs through my veins, and so it takes up a lot of my time. But equally, sometimes it's nice to just sit back and turn off the brain and drink something else, knowing that you haven't, there's no work to be done, there's no analysis. And I often do that around craft beer. A lot of my friends love talking about craft beer. Some of them make videos. They're all on Untapped, rating it and scoring it. And I don't do any of that. I drink far too much craft beer, and I need to look at that after Christmas. But it's one of my go-to drinks that I can just enjoy. And if someone wants to talk about flavor and production, I can. But I'd rather not, and I'd rather just sit back and enjoy something refreshing. The other somewhat newer diversion, during lockdown, I did my GCD, my General Certificate in Distillation. It seemed like a good use of not being able to leave the house. And towards the end of it, I thought, you know what? I know an awful lot about the production of mezcal, but I've probably only tasted 3 or 4 in my life. And so I've spent, the last sort of 18 months sorting that out, and have now tasted an awful lot of mezcal, which I'm not going to write about. I'm not going to lecture about. It's just something that, I just thought, wow, this is actually a really exciting spirit, because for the most part, there's no cask. It's all about the integrity and quality of that spirit, which, if you think Bimber's small, some of these palenques, Mexican distilleries, they're producing batches of like 10 to 20 liters, and that's it. So on the non-whiskey side, my go-tos are beer. If I just want to just relax and enjoy something refreshing, but equally there's a lot of innovation and craziness in the beer sector, which is spilling over into whiskey and back. And from a spirit side, just in terms of me expanding my horizons and continually learning, then mezcal comes with a big recommendation. Fascinating liquid.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I must admit, mezcal is something that I've been meaning to try. It's not going to. I don't think it's going to be this Christmas. I've decided to dip my toe in Calvados and further into rum as well. So they're my kind of little treats outside of whiskey that I've on recommendations from folks like yourself who.
That's all about recommendations, Eddie. If someone says, you should try it, and you trust in their opinion and palate, then go ahead and try it. Why not?
Exactly. So I might tap you up for a mezcal recommendation next year, if you don't mind. Don't mind at all. Brilliant. Well, listen, Matt, it's been a real pleasure to see you. I'm sorry we haven't been able to see each other in person since the last time we did an online event, but fingers crossed. And situations allowing, I'll see you either at Bimber or in Scotland or somewhere along the line. Absolutely, Eddie. Really looking forward to it. As you say, it's been far too long. The onlines are really nice, and it's always good to spend time with you. But really looking forward to sharing a beer or a Calvados with you in person. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, cheers, Matt, and thanks once again. And thanks to the folks at home for tuning in. Hope you've enjoyed this session, and Merry Christmas, Matt, to yourself and your family and everyone at Bimber. Cheers. Same to you. Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure. Cheers.